A Shalom Akim Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. Back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to read through the article that you see on the screen here. It says here that Trump threatens strikes on any countries he claims makes drugs for the U.S. So I wanted to read through this, because this is a very, this is a developing story. Right, but essentially Venezuela and the United States have had a lot of rift where President Trump has been placing a lot of economic, not sanctions per se, but economic strong arms against Venezuela. Right, primarily it's tariff situations, and not just Venezuela, but even countries that would do business with Venezuela, right? So I wanted to read through this because I thought it was very interesting, because it shows you, our people's, not our people's, but Esau's track record, and essentially going into other countries and making a fool of himself. And this is another reason why a lot of these nations do not like America, right? And, before I actually commenced, recording, I was just looking up briefly if Venezuela was part of the BRICS, right, which is that alliance. I think it's you have Brazil, you have Russia, India, China, and I believe the S is South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Right, so and essentially it's basically you have a lot of other nations that are basically trying to combat these powers, though, especially the Western powers. Now, what's very interesting is that Trump is basically fueling a lot of fire, right, in regards to the hatred, that the other nations have for America, right? So I wanted to read through this, and I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? Excuse me. So here it says, this is theguardian.com, and it says Trump warned on Tuesday that any country he believes is making drugs destined illegally for the U.S. is vulnerable to a military attack. It says the U.S. president's comments came during a question and answer session at the White House, and which he also said military strikes on land targets inside Venezuela, which he has accused of narco-terrorism, right? You can follow along, if you go to the actual, just type this link into Google, and it says would start very soon. The exchange with reporters followed with a lengthy cabinet meeting at which Trump and Peter Hegseth, the defense secretary, moved to put the responsibility with the Navy admiral, for the extrajudicial killing of two survivors of an attack on an alleged drug smuggling boat in September. So this has been essentially an ongoing feud, and you have other neighboring Caribbean islands have gotten involved, and they've kind of been forced to get involved in some kind of way, shape, or form, right? And it says here, asked if only Venezuela was in the Pentagon's crosshairs, Trump said he saw any country producing drugs for contraband as fair game, echoing previous saber-rattling direct at Mexico, right? So, here it is, he's basically trying to condemn the nation of Venezuela, for its drug problem, right? But when you look at America's history, America has had a lengthy drug problem and still continues to have a drug problem, right? So now you start to see a bit, not even a bit, but the hypocrisy of the American nation. They say certain things, and then it's not always what they actually do in practice, right? And I wanted to read something real quick, for what Yahweh Shai spoke about, and what Yahweh Shai said. And it says, this is Matthew chapter 7. I'll start at verse 2, and it says, "For with what judgment do ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest the mote which is in thy brother's eye, and but considereth not the beam that is in thy own eye? Or wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold a beam that is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam of thine own eye, then shalt thou see clearly to cast out to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye." Right? So, there's a dynamic that's being explained here, and you start to see what, and I'm reading this to show that, instead of actually for them, America, and them to cast out the beam, cast out that mote that's within their own eye, within their own nation, they're going around essentially trying to be the big bad bullies to point the finger at other nations' problems. But look at their track record. Ever since, when you go back to the 1970s, America has essentially had what you would call, quote unquote, the war on drugs, which was a very loose term, which was basically a war upon our people, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans. It was mostly it was a covert war against our people, and a war to criminalize and put our people, behind bars for very, very minor crimes, right? And back then you had a skyrocketing during the Nixon administration of a lot of our people's felonies. They're going into prisons. But the point is that America has had a strong drug problem ever since then. And back then it was, crack, it was cocaine, and it even escalated even up until the time of Bill Clinton, and even during that time, after he left administration, I believe that was in 2001 or so, what you had was a doubling of the prison population. So America has had a long history of having a drug problem, and for brothers who may not know, this is there was a movie that came out in I want to say it was the 1990s, called Boys in the Hood. If brothers ever seen it, it's a very, very good movie. And there's a scene in the movie where he explains, the father in the movie, how he was saying, and I'm merely paraphrasing it. He said, we don't own any ships and we don't own any planes, right? So how are these drugs getting into the country, right? But what you see on TV is essentially a criminalizing of our people, and Esau is very good with words, and he's very good at defacing our people's images, and this was a very, very common thing back then. But the point is, America has had a history of having a strong drug problem, right? This is nothing new, but they're going to other nations and trying to point the finger at their problems. Look at your own house, right? You're not trying to essentially pull that beam out of your own eye and clean up your own mess within your own house. And when I say house, I'm referring to their own nation. They're not doing those particular things, right? But they want to stand at the helm of righteousness, pretending to actually be somebody Like the scriptures talk about how Satan has transformed himself into an angel of light, right? This is the vibe that America tries to push off. They push off as seeming like they're all super duper righteous, but look at their works. And if you go later on in this chapter, Yahushai, you know, even said a tree is known by its fruits. And one of the words for fruits, the Greek word there is karpos, which means works and deeds, right? So I'm using what Yahushua said to kind of explain the behavior of Esau's behavior, because a lot of the times, Esau really is truly he's a hypocrite, right? But in context, speaking, Yahushua spoke about these different scribes and Pharisees, right? They were showing themselves to be a certain way, but they weren't actually conducting themselves in that particular way, right? So, but just to show and parallel, the how Esau comes across, right? And then him being essentially a hypocrite. But look at the way your look at your fruits, look at your works, look at the quality of your nation. The scriptures talk about how a wise judge would instruct his people, but look at your nation, right? So I want to go back to the article here. So here it says, if they come in through a certain country or any country, or if we think they're building mills, whether it's fentanyl or cocaine, anybody doing that and selling it in our country is subject to attack. Not just Venezuela, Trump said, adding that he heard Colombia was making cocaine. They have cocaine plants, right? So he's always in these other countries' business, trying to, whether it might be sneakily trying to extract the resources. That's another thing that Esau likes to do, right? So let me get this precept here. What's that? Okay, this is Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 5, and it says, yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathered unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. So this is the way Esau functions, because here it is. You have all these different problems going on within your own household, within your own nation, but you're going around to these other nations and causing a ruckus. What are you doing down there? What's going on down there? But Venezuela, if for brothers who don't know, Venezuela has very rich reserves of oil, right? And this is a very, very I don't want to say a hot commodity, but it's a hot commodity, right? This is something that the other nations want, to help benefit their own nations, right? Esau doesn't want you to be able to use the resources that are within your land so you Israelites can profit. He would rather have himself and you Israelites come to him for everything. So essentially he wants you in subjection. He wants you as a vassal, as opposed to you coming together with your own brethren, because that was something that was very, I don't know if it was, hold on, let me just look this up real quick. It's something I just want to look up real quick, just bear with me. Because in the Caribbean you had an alliance known as the Petro-Carib. I just want to look this up real quick, just for context sake. Petro-Carib. Okay, so check this out. So Petrocarib was a 2005 oil alliance led by Venezuela that provided Caribbean and Central American countries with discounted oil on preferential financial terms. So it says member states can pay for a portion of oil up front and pay the remainder over 25 years at a low interest rate. So this establishment was launched by um, in 2005 by the former president Hugo Chavez, right? And it said it included 18 states, including Antigua, Barbuda, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica, right? So this was essentially like a regional agreement between Venezuela and Caribbean states. This is what Esau doesn't like. This is the type of um what's it called, initiatives Esau does not like. He doesn't like when you're coming together and essentially, of course, they don't know and operating on the vibration of knowing that they're Israelites, but that's naturally what our people like to do anyway, without, because they just don't know that they have the breath in them. But the point really is, Esau doesn't like it when you come together as a people to try and do your own thing. He's always coming to you and trying to disturb your initiatives and disturb your people, right? It's the same thing with the different massacres that happen, like the Black Wall Street and so on and so forth, because our people were thriving, and then you had Esau had to come in with his destructive sword, and then he had to destroy that. He doesn't like it when you're on your own, right? He's always in other people's and other nations' businesses. And what does he do? He leaves a negative track record, right? This is why a lot of these nations don't like you. This is why you always, like in Obadiah, it describes, thou art greatly despised. Like, you and the little hat people are very despised amongst the other nations, because you have a bad track record, right? You have bad fruit, you have bad works, right? So this is continuing on here. I'm just going to read a little bit more. I'm just kind of jumping around, right? So I want to read this right here, and it says, Trump then said military action inside Venezuela was imminent, further inflaming a conflict that began with the targeted attacks on vessels its administration identified as engaged in drug trafficking, although without providing proof to the public, now on the verge of becoming a wider regional conflict, right? So there's no proof of this, but they always look for some sort of justification to try and justify their actions. So normally what they'll do is they will have a smear campaign, right? And a lot of our people, yes, are wicked, that's not to get away from our people's wickedness, but when we look at the wicked, the way because of the way how do I say it? Because of the way Esau functions, he operates on wickedness on a grander scale, where it actually affects other nations and it affects the welfare of the earth, right? This is the way he operates, right? It's because he leaves a very destructive trail, not just for the people or his own people, you Israelites, and even the other nations. So he's essentially like a cancer, right? So let me go to the book of what was that? What's that? Revelation. This is Revelation chapter 6, verse 4. And it says, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given unto him to sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword, right? So Esau, remember, going back to Genesis, Esau was blessed with the sword, right? So what he does, he goes into other nations. So that could either be artillery, it can either be social media, it can either be words, it can be legislation, it can be policies. He's very, very crafty with his words. his weaponry, and this is the way he functions, right? So, and what he does, he creates a trail of havoc for the earth and these other nations as well, and even his own people. I'll give you another example of this. Was I believe it was in 2011. If you look up um, images of Libya and prior to Gaddafi's passing, and then looking at those images after his passing, you see a dramatic difference between that same country. This is why you have a lot of these countries, including their own allies, they have a strong hatred for the whore, right? Speaking of America, because of these sentiments, because they left a bad taste in their mouth, right? So it says, let me go back here. Where was I? Okay, so this is a quote, and it says, "We are going to start doing strikes on those, doing those strikes on land too." He said, "The land is much easier, and we know that the routes they take, we know everything about them. We know that where they live, we know where the bad ones live. We're going to start that very soon." And this is what, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is just my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if Venezuela, tries to seek membership and alliance with Gog, right? So you have, when you read Ezekiel 38, there's a list of nations that going to seek, or going to have, I should say, protection from the other nations, from what's it called? They're going to have protection from Russia, I should say, right? And so you have Persia, you have Ethiopia, you have Libya, right? And then those particular nations, and then coupled with a lot of the other BRICS nations, so you have like China, you have a lot of these other nations where, they're going to have that protection from Russia, essentially to have and take their revenge upon the whore, right? Because that's what they want to do. They want to burn her with fire. That's just because they have a sour taste in their mouth, right? They haven't forgotten, right? So you know here it says, during the cabinet meeting with Hegseth gave a conflicting account of his actions following the September double strike on alleged drug vote on armed services. Committees in both in the House and the Senate are investigating as possibly illegal, right? It says Hegseth told the cabinet meeting on Tuesday he watched the first strike, but ultimately did not stick around for more than an hour or 2 hours after. During the two survivors clinging to the boat were fired from the second time and killed, right? So this is just going to show that Esau has a very bad track record, and it's going to lead to their downfall, right? Let me get this last one here. This is Sirach chapter 12 verse 8, and it says, "And a friend cannot be known, in prosperity, and an enemy cannot be hidden in adversity." So Esau is not hiding himself in this moment of adversity, because you Israelites need to understand that this individual, these people, are your enemy. And that's another thing also that they like to do when they don't get their way, or when they do get their way, I should say. What they will do is, when they take fields and covet them by violence, like it says in Micah, what they'll do is for a lot of these countries, they'll extract the resources, and they will make sure that they have a puppet leader installed in place within your own nation. He might even look like you, but he's bringing forth an agenda that is not suited to actually help you, but to harm you, right? So that's why you get people in these different Caribbean islands where they cause the people to err, as it says in Isaiah the 9th chapter, right? So this is the works of Esau, this is his fruits thereof, right? And it's gonna come back to bite him, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shabbat Shalom.